Elvis Presley was never supposed to be afraid. Not on stage. Not backstage. Not behind closed doors. He was the king, the man millions believed was untouchable. But late one night, in a hotel hallway far from the spotlight, Elvis Presley said 3 words that almost no one ever heard. "I'm afraid." Only one person was there to hear it, a bodyguard who never spoke about that moment. Not to reporters, not to friends, not even years later. What made Elvis say those words? And why did that confession never leave the hallway where it was spoken? Stay with us until the end, because this story reveals a version of Elvis Presley that fame worked hard to hide and fear finally exposed. The hotel was quiet in a way only expensive hotels ever are. Soft carpet, muted lights, silence padded by money and privacy. Elvis walked slowly down the hallway, not wearing a jumpsuit, not surrounded by fans, just dark clothes, collar open, shoulders slightly tense. His footsteps were steady, but his posture betrayed something else. He wasn't in a hurry. He was delaying. Behind him, a single bodyguard followed at a respectful distance. No entourage, no jokes, no small talk, just presence. They had just come from a private meeting, the kind that drained Elvis more than any performance ever could. Decisions made about him, plans laid for him, words spoken like facts. Elvis stopped in front of his hotel room door. He didn't unlock it right away. Instead, he stood there, staring at the brass numbers like they might tell him something he didn't already know. "You wanted to stay?" the bodyguard asked quietly. Elvis didn't answer. The hallway felt longer now, colder. "I'll be right outside," the bodyguard added, already sensing the answer. Elvis nodded slightly. He reached for the key, then stopped. His hand hovered there, unmoving. The bodyguard noticed. "Elvis," he said. Elvis turned slowly. Up close, without stage lights, the exhaustion showed. Not physical, deeper, the kind that sat behind the eyes. He swallowed. "I don't like how this feels," Elvis said quietly. The bodyguard didn't respond. He had learned that silence was often safer than reassurance. Elvis leaned his forehead briefly against the door, exhaling. "You ever get the feeling," he continued, voice lower now, "that something's coming and you don't know how to stop it?" The question hung in the hallway. The bodyguard shifted his weight slightly but stayed where he was. "Sometimes," he said. Elvis nodded. "I've been strong a long time," Elvis said. "Longer than I should have had to be." His voice cracked, just barely. Then came the words. Soft, unpracticed, unprotected. "I'm afraid." The bodyguard felt the weight of it immediately. Not because Elvis sounded weak. Because he didn't. He sounded honest. And that was rarer. The bodyguard didn't step closer. Didn't touch him. Didn't try to fix anything. He simply said, "You don't gotta carry that alone tonight." Elvis closed his eyes for a moment. The hallway stayed quiet. No cameras. No witnesses. No applause. Just a man at the edge of his own strength. And the one person who heard him say it. And neither of them knew, in that moment, how long those 3 words would stay locked inside that hallway. The door finally opened, but Elvis didn't step inside right away. He stood there in the doorway, one hand resting against the frame, as if crossing the threshold required more strength than he had expected. The bodyguard stayed where he was, a few feet down the hall. Close enough, not intrusive. Inside the room, the lights were low, curtains drawn. The silence felt thicker here, less forgiving than the hallway. Elvis took a slow breath and stepped in. The door closed softly behind him, not with finality, but with intention. He moved through the room without turning on more lights, pacing once, then stopping near the window. The city glowed faintly beyond the glass, distant and unreachable. The bodyguard cleared his throat gently from the other side of the door. "I'm here." Elvis nodded, though no one could see it. "I know." He sat on the edge of the bed, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped together tightly enough for his knuckles to pale. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Elvis spoke again, quieter now, like the words were meant for the room more than for the man listening. "They think I'm scared of the stage," he said. "That's what they always think." The bodyguard didn't interrupt. "I ain't scared of singing," Elvis continued. I ain't scared of crowds. Hell, I ain't even scared of messing up. He let out a short, humorless laugh. I'm scared of what happens when I stop. The words settled heavy in the air. The bodyguard shifted closer to the door, still outside, still respecting the space. What do you mean? Elvis rubbed his face slowly, dragging his hands down like he was trying to wake himself from something. I don't know who I am when the noise fades, he admitted. When the schedule's gone. When nobody needs nothing. He stood up suddenly and began pacing again, restless energy filling the small room. All my life, somebody's told me where to be, what to do, how long to stay strong, he said. And now everybody's saying, slow down. His voice sharpened slightly. But nobody tells you how. The bodyguard listened, jaw tight. You ever feel like you've been running so long? Elvis went on. That stopping feels like Fallon? The question was rhetorical. Elvis stopped pacing and leaned against the dresser, staring at his own reflection in the mirror. Without the jumpsuit, without the lights, just a man with tired eyes. They keep saying I'm going to be fine, he said, that I got nothing to worry about. He shook his head. That's what scares me. The bodyguard finally spoke again. You sound like someone who's been carrying more than people see. Elvis nodded slowly. And if I drop it, he said, I don't know what's left. Silence filled the room again. Then Elvis said something that made the bodyguard's breath catch. I don't think I'm scared of dying, Elvis said quietly. I think I'm scared of living without all this. The admission felt final in a way nothing else had. The bodyguard didn't respond right away. He understood then that Elvis wasn't asking for comfort. He was asking for witness. I ain't going to tell anyone what you said tonight, the bodyguard finally said. Not now. Not ever. Elvis turned from the mirror. I know, he said. That's why I said it. He sat back down on the bed, shoulders sagging. For the first time since they'd entered the room, Elvis looked smaller. Not weaker, just human. And the bodyguard realized something unsettling. This fear had nothing to do with the next show. It was about what came after the applause stopped, and whether Elvis Presley believed there would still be something worth standing for. The bodyguard had been trained to react to danger, crowds pushing too close, strangers moving too fast, threats you could see coming. This was different. There was no weapon in the room, no raised voice, no emergency call to make. And yet, every instinct in him was screaming that something was wrong. Elvis sat on the bed now, elbows on his knees, staring at the carpet like it held answers it had no intention of giving. The man who could command an arena with a single step looked suddenly unsure how to occupy a quiet room. The bodyguard checked his watch. Protocol said he should report unusual behavior. Protocol said he should alert management. Protocol said silence was not an option. But nothing about this felt like a situation that could survive being reported. Elvis, he said carefully, choosing his words the way you choose steps on thin ice. Do you want someone else here tonight? Elvis didn't look up. No. The answer was immediate. Certain. All right, the bodyguard replied. He stayed by the door longer than necessary. He didn't announce it. He didn't explain it. He just stayed. Minutes passed. Then more. Elvis lay back on the bed, one arm draped over his eyes, breathing slow but uneven. The room felt suspended in time, like both men were waiting for something that refused to arrive. You ever regret not saying something when you had the chance? Elvis asked suddenly. The bodyguard thought about it. Yes, he said. Elvis nodded. Me too. Silence returned. The bodyguard understood then that his job wasn't protection tonight. It was presence. He pulled a chair closer to the door and sat down, back straight, hands resting calmly on his knees. Not looming, not watching, just there. If someone asked later, he could say Elvis wanted privacy. If someone pressed, he could say nothing unusual happened. Both would be true. Hours passed that way. Elvis eventually rolled onto his side, facing away, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Not sleep rest, the kind that comes only when someone else is quietly keeping watch. At some point, Elvis spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. Don't let him turn this into a thing. The bodyguard nodded, even though Elvis couldn't see it. I won't. That was the moment he crossed a line, not by doing something dramatic, but by deciding what he would never repeat. The fear, the words, the silence, all of it would stay right there, locked inside that hotel room. Because the bodyguard understood something most people never would. Elvis didn't need saving. He needed space to exist without being managed. And sometimes, the strongest protection is knowing when not to call it in. The quiet didn't last. It never does. Sometime after midnight, the hallway outside the room stirred. Soft footsteps, a muffled voice, the distant hum of an elevator stopping on the floor. The bodyguard noticed it immediately. Silence had a sound when you learned to listen for it breaking. He stood slowly and cracked the door open just enough to look out. 2 men from the inner circle were approaching, voices low but urgent. "Where is he?" one whispered. "In his room. Door's been shut for hours," the other replied. "That ain't normal." The bodyguard closed the door again gently, as if even sound could disturb what was holding Elvis together inside. He glanced back toward the bed. Elvis hadn't moved, but his breathing had changed. Shallower now. Alert. He had heard them. "They're coming," Elvis said quietly. "Yeah," the bodyguard replied. "I know." Elvis sat up slowly, rubbing his face. The fear from earlier hadn't disappeared. It had simply gone underground, waiting. "They don't like it when I go quiet," Elvis said. "They think something's wrong." The bodyguard chose his words carefully. Sometimes quiet is the first thing people try to take. A knock hit the door. Not loud, not polite, strategic. "Elvis?" A voice called from the other side. "You all right in there?" Elvis closed his eyes. The bodyguard stepped forward. "He's resting." There was a pause. "That's not what I asked," the voice replied. Elvis looked at the bodyguard. Something unreadable in his eyes. Gratitude, fear, trust, all tangled together. "I didn't tell him," Elvis said. "I know," the bodyguard replied. Another knock. Firmer this time. "We need to talk to him," the voice insisted. The bodyguard opened the door just enough to step into the hall, blocking the view inside with his body. He said, "Not tonight." The man frowned. "Since when does he decide that?" The bodyguard held his ground. "Since now." The tension stretched thin. Finally, the men exchanged looks. One shook his head. "This'll be a problem in the morning," he muttered. The bodyguard didn't respond. When they walked away, the hallway felt colder. Inside, Elvis exhaled shakily. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Yes," the bodyguard replied. "I did." Elvis laughed softly, not amused, not bitter. Relieved. "Most folks hear fear and try to fix it," Elvis said. "Or sell it." The bodyguard nodded. "Some things don't belong to anybody else." Elvis lay back again, staring at the ceiling. "You ever wonder," he asked, "how many times I smiled when I should have said I was scared?" The bodyguard didn't answer, because the answer was already in the room. Outside, the hotel lights buzzed. Schedules adjusted. Conversations continued without him. Inside, Elvis Presley remained still, held together by silence that was starting to crack under pressure. And the bodyguard understood something then. Keeping this quiet would cost him, but breaking it might cost Elvis everything. The breaking point didn't come with shouting. It came with a phone call. The bodyguard felt it vibrate in his pocket before it ever rang out loud. He stepped into the bathroom, closed the door softly, and answered. "Where is he?" a voice demanded. Controlled, authoritative, used to being obeyed. "He's resting," the bodyguard said. "That's not acceptable," the voice replied. "We need eyes on him. Now." The bodyguard stared at his reflection in the mirror. The uniform, the posture, the version of himself that existed to follow orders. "He's not in danger," he said. There was a pause on the other end. Then a shift. "This isn't about danger," the voice said. "It's about control." The line went dead. The bodyguard stood there longer than necessary, breathing slowly, weighing consequences that no training manual covered. If he complied, the room would fill with people, questions, decisions. Elvis would become a situation. If he didn't, this would follow him. He returned to the bedroom. Elvis was sitting up now. knees drawn in slightly, watching the door like he'd been expecting bad news. "They want in," the bodyguard said. Elvis nodded once. "I figured." He didn't look angry. He looked tired of predicting the same ending over and over. "I ain't foul apart," Elvis said. "I just don't want to be managed tonight." The bodyguard believed him. That was a problem. He crossed the room and stood near the door again, shoulders squared. "I'm going to tell him you're fine," he said. "And I'm going to keep telling him that." Elvis looked up sharply. "That could get you in trouble." The bodyguard shrugged. "I've had worse nights." Elvis laughed softly, then stopped. "You don't owe me that," Elvis said. The bodyguard met his gaze. "No," he replied, "but I'm doing anyway." They sat in silence again, but it felt different now, less fragile, like something had been decided, even if no one said it out loud. Minutes passed, then more. The knock never came back. Instead, messages filtered through the staff. Elvis would rest. Plans would shift. Morning would sort it out. Inside the room, Elvis leaned back against the pillows and closed his eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly. The bodyguard didn't respond. He stayed where he was, chair angled toward the door, one ear tuned to the hallway, the other to the sound of Elvis breathing. Steady now. Grounded. As the night stretched on, the bodyguard realized the truth of what he'd chosen. There would be no report, no incident log, no explanation. This night would never exist on paper. And that was exactly why it mattered. Because sometimes the most important decisions aren't the ones that protect a career. They're the ones that protect a person, even if no one ever knows you made them. Morning arrived without ceremony. No emergency calls. No damage control. No dramatic aftermath. Just light slipping through the hotel curtains and the quiet hum of a city waking up, unaware of how close something had come to breaking the night before. The bodyguard was still in the chair by the door when Elvis stirred. Not suddenly. Not startled. He woke the way someone does after finally resting, cautiously, like trust was involved. Elvis sat up and looked around the room, taking inventory. Same walls, same silence, same man by the door. "You still here?" Elvis said. The bodyguard nodded. "Yeah." Elvis exhaled slowly. "Thought maybe I dreamed last night." "You didn't," the bodyguard replied. Elvis rubbed his face, then let his hands fall into his lap. "Funny thing," he said quietly. "I say those words out loud once, and they don't feel as heavy anymore." The bodyguard studied him. Elvis looked tired, yes, but steadier, like something had been set down, even briefly. "You ain't weak for saying it," the bodyguard said. Elvis nodded. "I know." They sat in silence for a moment, the good kind now, the kind that didn't feel like pressure. "You gonna tell anyone?" Elvis asked. The bodyguard shook his head. "No." Elvis believed him. That was the difference. As Elvis stood and began getting dressed, the day tried to reclaim him. Calls waited. Schedules reassembled. The machine revved back to life. But something subtle had changed. Before leaving the room, Elvis stopped. He turned back to the bodyguard. "You know why I said it to you?" Elvis asked. The bodyguard thought for a second. "Because I was there." Elvis smiled faintly. "No, because you didn't need me to be anything else." The word stayed with the bodyguard long after Elvis walked out. Years passed. Stories were told. Rumors grew. Versions of Elvis Presley multiplied. The icon, the excess, the legend, the tragedy. But that night never became one of them. The bodyguard never spoke about it. Not when people asked. Not when books were written. Not when silence would have been easier to fill with something dramatic. Because that moment wasn't about collapse. It was about trust. Elvis Presley, the man the world believed was fearless, had said, "I'm afraid," once, in a hallway with no witnesses. And someone had listened without turning it into a story. In the end, that was the protection Elvis needed most. Not guards, not gates, not walls. Just one night where fear was allowed to exist, and didn't cost him his dignity.